Guest speakers today, we have with us Arnie Guha, PhD, Partner and Chief Innovation Officer at Phase 5. He leads the experience design. Arnie leads the firm's experience strategy and design. He loves telling stories and listening to them. He believes that all perception relies on narrative and that our understanding of the world is directly dependent on our ability to pick out appropriate threads of a story and to reweave them in an interesting and relevant ways. Prior to Phase 5, Arnie has been manager, market research at RBC, intern at the Center of Democracy and Technology in Washington, D.C., a doctoral researcher at UBC, and a Nehru Centenary Scholar at Cambridge University. Currently, Arnie is chair of the advisory board of Green College, UBC. Next, we have with us Andreas Noe, founding partner of Phase 5. Andreas leads Phase 5's customer experience and market insight teams. He has developed expertise in CX strategy, metrics, and performance measurement. Voice of the customer and customer experience studies. Having done all these for a range of clients, Andreas brings world-class research methods and first-hand insight into understanding and managing customer outcomes. He has led several professional associations and clubs as a board member and president, and as a former marketing lecturer at the University of Ottawa. I want to welcome everyone today. But before we begin, just a few housekeeping things. We want to let you know that this episode will be recorded, and we want to ask you to please use the chat for your questions. Don't use the question and answer, just please put everything in the chat, and we will take it from there. We will be able to answer your questions. What we're going to do today is I'll go through a series of questions that we will have answered in the panel discussion, and then we will leave ample time so that we can answer the questions that you will raise. Because integrating CX and UX for the ultimate competitive advantage will be to our benefits. But first question to Andreas. What is CX and how is it different from UX?
Thanks very much, Lee, and thank you, Lee and Wayne and MRIA for inviting us here. It's a pleasure to be here, and we're happy to chat about this topic, which is very near and dear to our hearts. So CX and UX are a little different, and Arnie, being the storyteller, he might jump in with a few comments about the origins of UX, which are really, really interesting and quite different from the origins of CX. And we know that there's sometimes been this sort of internal and external focus on trying to describe the two, and the way we look at it is a bit different. We see it centered around the evolving ecosystems that organizations are used to define who the customer is. In some very simple environments, the user is the same as the customer, is the same as the payer. In other environments, they're really quite different. In fact, very different people in very different roles. And so this requires us to better understand what that ecosystem is about to define whether someone's a user versus a customer versus a payer. But what's really important is we've got to be able to align all of these things however they're defined in that ecosystem. And today that point of alignment is much more around journeys, which is a really, really positive and constructive thing. So we are looking more and more at identifying user experiences or describing customer experiences in the context of those journeys. And for us, CX versus UX is really about the lens. How far do we zoom in to look at something? Are we looking at something that's digital only and it's a very specific application or a tool or something that someone is trying to do online? Or is it a bit more broad and focused on a specific type of journey or what a customer is doing in a specific moment on the journey that may touch not just digital things, but a whole bunch of other things? So we like to call that a lens. We like to do it in the context of journeys. And we've got many examples of our clients who are looking at these things, and to them, it doesn't really matter whether it's a user or a customer. What's important is to develop an insight, and the label that they give to it will be very context specific. Arnie?
Absolutely. Thank you, Andreas, and thank you, Lee. Thank you, MRIA, and thank you all of our guests for being here today. Yes, as Andreas mentioned, I think the origin has a fair bit to do with it, but let's focus on the words themselves. CX, customer experience, UX, user experience. So right there, when if you will, reducing someone to the role of a user, you're defining that person by their relationship to the interface of the machine or the tool that they are using. And that's where it goes back to the discipline, if you will, the human-machine interaction, human-computer interaction, which is the birth of UX. So just roughly put, if you will, or philosophically, CX looks at a human being in toto and looks at the relationship between the human being, me, Andreas, anybody who's interacting with a brand across any number of channels. UX, on the other hand, because of that user focus, is focusing on a particular channel, which typically tends to be digital, but does not have to be. We've done UX work for IVRs, for phone, right? We've done UX work for physical kiosks. But the focus is on the tool and the individual, the channel. Lee, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. UX and CX are very separate silos in an organization. Why do you believe it is essential to leverage them together?
Well, I might take a stab at it, if you don't mind. Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, let's think about channels. Let's carry on where we started. So when we talk about the user, we are focusing, if you will, on the tool, on the channel of communication. Now, let's take a very common business that touches all of our lives. Two, in fact, one is a business, the other is a service. Let's take government, let's take banks in this country. We all have to deal with the government and the banks, rely on them, and they both have very high credibility measures across Canadians. When it comes to banking today, retail banking, the sort of stuff that you and I do with our banks all the time, what really is the difference between the service, if you will, that I'm getting by way of having a checking or a savings account, any kind of DDA, any kind of demand deposit account with a bank? That line between, I'm not getting a huge lot of interest from it. So really, when you think about it, the way in which I access my money, the way in which I spend my money, it's not just heavily dependent on a channel, but the channel itself becomes the service. So once upon a time, years ago, decades ago, you could look at, well, there's online banking, there's maybe mobile banking, there's telephone banking. These are all different channels. And yes, technically that is still true. But in the majority of cases, when I'm interacting with my bank, when I'm actually availing myself of the service that the bank is offering me for my checking or savings account, it is not divorced from the channel. So that experience that I'm having is, in fact, my customer experience. So it's very difficult to say this is Arnie, the user of this channel, versus Arnie, the customer of the bank. Not quite so with government quite yet, but we are getting there for the simple reason that COVID happened, if nothing else. And uh, to go a bit McLuhan on it, if you will, the channel becomes the service. So, yeah. Andreas?
Yeah, that's a really good observation, Arnie. Thanks for sharing that. I would just add that, organizations, especially large ones, they're really complex things. And trying to do things across silos can be very, very challenging. But that's where many are today. I mean, we continue to be tasked with trying to do things within a silo that are very focused, and they may be very operational in nature. But more and more, to be successful, organizations have to figure out ways to cross silos, to work collaboratively with different parts of the organization to really achieve their goals. And that in and of itself is a reason why CX practitioners and UX practitioners need to work together. Because they come at it from a maybe slightly different lens, but our goal, our role is to deliver insight to get clients to next best action. And we need to work together on teams to do that. And we need to do that in an agile way more than ever before. We need to be fast and flexible. So this idea of working independently and in your own little shop and doing your own thing, it just doesn't work well in today's modern organization. So we have to have ways to cut across those silos and work together.
Okay, thank you. So it leads me to the next question to ask. How important is UX and CX to deliver in a competitive advantage? Andreas?
I could take a turn at that one. Academics, practitioners, they've, I think, demonstrated over and over and over again that there is competitive advantage to delivering on CX. What's more challenging now, though, is we see organizations through their boards and senior leaders who want to have more demonstrated evidence of the ROI, behind CX and UX to be able to justify the investments that they're being asked to make around some of these strategies to achieve their goals and objectives. And that's really, really critical. And they lean heavily on the insights function, be it from CX or UX or the two together or other parts of the organization to inform that. And that's really important. The challenge now, of course, is the new battleground is trying to meet customers' emotional needs, right? And that's the big part of this. And marketers have known this for decades and decades, that that's the goal. If we really want to win their hearts, we've got to get to their minds. And that's where the real new battleground is. And that's where I think both CX and UX have a critical role to play in helping our clients understand what their customers are seeking to achieve, particularly not just on a functional level, but at an emotional level.
Arnie, did you have anything that you wanted to share on that?
I fully agree with Andreas. Again, I'll go back to the point I made earlier, the distinction between a channel of service and the actual offering, the service offering, the overall experience of the brand and the offering. That distinction is all but disappearing. And it's not just in obvious industries like banking and sort of demand deposit accounts and so on and so forth, but um, again, with digital transformation, with omni-channel delivery, we just see increasingly that the expectations are such that uh, a customer will simply want to and does, in fact, interact with brands across multiple channels, including digital channel, and they simply see it as overall experience. So it becomes very important. One of my favorite slides years ago when I used to teach this was in fact one of Andreas' slides from one of his projects. There was a regression model that would show. So it was a quant survey that was done. It was a regression model that actually quantified the impact that UX had on the dependent variable, which in that particular case was the composite variable, was customer delight, and it just proves it like right off the bat, and that was years ago. So it must have, frankly, if we were to do the same thing today, I think we would see similar, if not more, emphatic results.
Okay, let me question to follow up with you, Arnie, on this. So is it better for a research agency to be UX focused or CX focused?
Well, I think if you don't mind, Lee, and with
Yes.
all due respect, the fallacy in the question itself is the
Yeah.
is the fallacy of governance, if you
Yeah.
will, that, as Andreas mentioned,
Yeah.
all organizations, not just, I mean, mostly large organizations, but really most organizations labor under today. It's not that they don't know that CX and UX should not necessarily be differentiated, that they need to work in tandem, but for any number of legacy reasons, governance is in silos. So I would say, if anything, as a smaller agency, I mean, in general, I always like to tell our clients, I like to tell ourselves internally that our job as an agency that works with some of the largest organizations in the world, but as an agency, we are very small, is we can grease the wheels of our clients' workings where they are unable to do so. We can come in as that smaller, agile group, if you will, and act as the lubricant where they get stuck within internal silos and so on. So to go back to your question, Lee, I think as an agency, we need to be right at the forefront of managing this UX-CX convergence or working in tandem, and frankly, be the lube where our clients experience friction. So I think maybe it's not the most satisfactory answer to your question because I'm not telling you which of the two. I would say that agencies need the two to work together and help our clients do the same wherever and however we can.
So how can phase 5 basically approach, how would you approach UX and CX differently now? Do you have an example that you could share with us in terms of that approach without divulging any proprietary information into that? I don't know if you have anything that you could share.
Sure, I'll go first. I'll try to be
Discreet.
as discreet as possible. At the We were going to do this project anyway, and then COVID happened, and this is for one of our very large global clients, and we wanted to do a competitive assessment of everything that was happening in their field, uh, how they were performing, their major competitors were performing right across the client journey. And the client journey starting with, the client's interest in these products, their exposure to the products, evaluating the products, and then after selection, the usage and support of these products. So there's an element of competitive mystery shopping, if you will. It was quite a deep dive. It was heuristic evaluation, and the idea was to do it cross-channel. So, for instance, when it came to interest in these products, and this is B2B, it's a data product. Let me not reveal anything further than that. And what we found out as we were doing this very quickly is the relationship between the different channels. So, for instance, at the when the customer, and you're of course in the shoes of the customer, you're plotting the journey, you're mapping the experience across our client and their competitors and so on. And so you're at a stage where you're interested in a particular product, you filled out a form online, then someone calls you back. Uh, we found ourselves documenting things like how long was it before someone called you back? What was the quality of that conversation? If there were multiple individuals from the same organization calling you, did it look like they were using a similar posture? Were they using a similar script format? What was the follow-up? The follow-up that happened after the phone conversation could very well have been a digital one. Where were the points of automation? Where were the points? Where were the data hooks? Where were the points of digital transference? Now, just perhaps listening to the last 10 seconds of myself speak, you can see how we're constantly jumping around what traditionally would have been, the field of UX and field of CX. But if we had taken that approach, the whole project would have collapsed. And in fact, this is one of the most important projects that we've done for this particular client, who are a long-standing client of ours. And I think this is gradually the way in which most of our clients are working with us to look at their world.
Okay, Andreas, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or because this was I don't.
I would just add, I think there's no right answer here. I mean, my answer to your question was yes. It could be either. It's really tied to the skills and the expertise and the direction that business wants to take. I think what really matters is that we're one voice that comes to the table to help inform a decision or move our clients forward. That's really what matters. And the way we've got to look at it, whatever toolkit we bring to that, and advice that we bring to that, and guidance that we bring to that, we've got to premise that on being the source of truth on behalf of the user and the customer. And what is called, to Arnie's point, I think is really academic.
And I will, by way of methodology and approach, Lee, to answer your question, there is actually one particular mode that we started using a few years ago, but as the worlds of UX and CX have been converging and our clients have bought into that, it's become very popular. It's something we call the dev shop. So let's say you've done a foundational study, you've gone out, you've done your audit, or you've done your research, however you've done it, you've come up with a whole range of ideas for implementation. And that's what good insight does. You've got all of the insight, you've got all of the ideas, opportunities, and so on. What we've started doing now is holding, whether it's 1 day or 2 day sessions, sort of strategy sessions called development workshops, hence dev shop. The important bit here, though, is the whole point of the dev shop is get people from all over the organization, product people, channel, as well as folks from IT compliance, folks who we all have to say are, dismissed as naysayers, but they're not naysayers. Their role exists for a reason, and a very good reason. And if you bring them all in, to something like a workshop where you're announcing and discussing the various ideas that have come out of your insights gathering, you explaining the process, you explain the context, and you're actually involving all of them in breakout sessions, in prioritization exercises. What that does is it almost pre-socializes the research insights, the opportunities, the recommendations, not to mention the actual prioritization process itself. It pre-socializes this across the organization, across those sorts of silos. It starts that conversation, and that conversation is perhaps the best way to wash away the sort of the rust, if you will, of the old legacy silos and start this process of convergence that, of course, we are discussing today.
Lee, it's Andreas. I would just jump in with one more comment, not to hold this question hostage. The one benefit of that we find too of keeping the two together, or having the benefit of the two together under one agency, is we get to beg, borrow, and steal from each other constantly. And sometimes that's just around really innovative ways of looking at gathering insights. So we've stole as much as we could from UX methods using qualitative research to explore why someone might not tick a box on a government form, a really important government form that if someone bothered to tick that box was going to save government millions and millions and millions of dollars by data share through leveraging data sharing agreements. So we used a lot of guidance from UX to understand how do we get people to tick that box. And there was no machine at the time we did the thing. There was no machine involved in that at all. But we were really able to dig in deep into understanding motives, rationale for that behavior, how that behavior could be affected, how different people had different personas with respect to how they looked at that challenge and what might prevent them from ticking that box. And it was incredibly valuable to be able to tackle that kind of a problem by leveraging some of the knowledge gathering skills and tools from UX.
And I think we will hold this question hostage.
Yes,
It's an important question. It's a very good question, right? And thank you for that, Andreas. The obvious of that is absolutely true. So in UX, I'm proud to say we are one of the very few firms who use heavy-duty quantitative techniques for persuasive design. So, for instance, if we are trying to decide on what the best, well, again, depending on what our dependent variable is here, but let's say we want to understand what will get someone to click on, let's say, an ad. This is an example from a real project. We've actually borrowed the framework of conjoint, but we have superimposed a linguistic framework on it, the syntagmatic and paradigmatic, as opposed to levels and attributes. And we have done A/B tests in real life with real designs and used actual quantitative techniques. So we could then come back and tell our client, this is what your optimal ad would look like. And if you change your definition of optimal, whatever it is you want to do, same as you would in a different kind of campaign, well, then this is what the design needs to be.
Well, that's a fantastic answer. I see you've looked at two other questions I was looking at to ask, how do you marry old and new technology and methodologies, which you have done so well, and you have looked to really overcome the stumbling block or maybe the resistance that organizations might offer by introducing the workshop and bringing everyone on board when you are making changes and introducing new concepts. So that's a really great thing that I see that in terms of what Phase 5 is doing to really push the envelope forward. And we want to look to see, what do you see the future of UX and CX, and how methodology changes? And we see with all the technology changing so fast that even laws cannot keep up with them. How are we going to adjust with this going forward?
I could jump in here if you like. It is changing really, really quickly. All the while, we know that organizations need to have this data, the intelligence, and the insights at critical points along the journey to understand either the customer, the user, or the payer, as the case may be. And it could be for even the overall relationship health. And our clients really don't care too much really about where the insight comes from. Data analytics is really, really big, and everyone's jumping on data analytics to deliver those insights. And that's a really, really positive development. But when you scratch the surface a little bit and you start to work with data analytics, for example, it's excellent at identifying where maybe there are trouble spots or opportunities, but it's still not always great at getting to the why. So an example that I'll use, Lee, is, we had a client that had a real problem in onboarding new customers, and they were trying to figure out, where that problem was most extreme and what they were going to do about it. The analytics was really powerful to be able to diagnose from which channels these customers were acquired and where the trouble spots were. So the analytics was fantastic there. What it couldn't, it even helped us be able to profile a little bit some of the differences that were driving cancellations during onboarding, but they couldn't tell us why. So we learned, for example, a face-to-face experience was a problematic channel as they were onboarding new customers. And we knew it was relevant to, persona XYZ, but we still couldn't get to the why. We had to go back to more traditional methods like qualitative research to really dig into why. So for the person responsible for insights, we just have a lot more tools that we can bring to the table, and a lot more new emerging tools that we can really start to test. And that's the one message I would want to get across here is you've got to take the time to kick the tires and apply your own sniff test to what's out there. There's some really, really good developments. There's some stuff that's maybe not so good.
Yeah.
And if we just look at what's evolving with metaverse, there'll be approaches to insights gathering that start to emerge that we haven't even thought of. And by way of one more example, we have a client that's come to us and said, we want to improve our personalization and customization of our experiences when we know who the customer is and where they are on that journey, but we need to collect more data about them in order to drive what we can then offer them or what gets us to next best action with that specific customer. And they have a need to go and get this data, but it's not easy to capture that data because they want it to be very immersive and relevant to the experience that they're having. So they don't want to stop someone in the middle of experience, even at checkout, and to begin to ask them a litany of questions in a survey that helps them gather this data because it undermines the experience. So they're asking us to come back with more innovative ways of trying to capture that. Can we use emotional semiotics to get at it, or visual semiotics to get at it? Are there different tests or observations that we could create in that environment, in that touch point, to begin to understand how we might tag somebody for specific data elements that we want to capture? Just some examples of what we're seeing. Arnie?
Absolutely, and I think Andreas said it so well. I have very little to add. The only word of caution, if anything, I would add a word of caution here is we live in an age where we're swimming in data. We also live in an age where optimal as opposed to the ideal. I'd rather take a picture on my phone than on my, real camera and so on and so forth. That's where we live, right? And that's where I think we can sometimes be seduced by data, and falsely so. So if anything, I stand by Andreas's example there as a word of caution, that I think we should be careful as to what we use and how we use it.
That is so true because things are changing, but the marketing and research profession basically brings a unique skill set to the study and help clients to really understand what they need and how to make sense of the data. Because in the sea of data, you need someone to really pick it out and make sense of it, or else it's just basically just a sea of data without any value to it. And I know that you guys have been practicing. So have you managed situations where a user or customer reaction is negative? Because I know sometimes you might have to bring hard truths to your clients without disclosing anything, but in terms of how do we handle these difficult situations?
Well, isn't that where the customer gets the biggest ROI? I mean,
Absolutely.
the other way, right, of looking at it is we just saved you not just a ton of money. It could be a reputation, could be any number of things. And I have an example from actually, this is quite interesting. It was at the start of not just my career, but at the start of our own UX lab, which is one of the earliest, if not, the earliest agency level lab in the country. There weren't many agencies that were offering UX labs at the time, and we were helping one of our major national newspapers go online, like for the first time. They didn't have. This is how far back I'm talking about. One of our major papers, they did not have any online presence. They were about to go online. So really, it was meant to be a usability study. So we did a study, and our client says to us, and by the way, while you're doing this, just at the end of each interview, would you mind testing this ad for us? Because starting tomorrow, we think we're going to put this ad on every sort of bus stop, billboard across the country to warn people that in a month we're all going online. Now, the ad, this picture in the ad, was of the newspaper in question hanging on wires, like clothing, through clothes clips, like online. So the idea was, here's the newspaper online. And every single person who saw it said, hang on a second, you mean you're hanging yourself out to dry? So it was a visual metaphor gone wrong.
Yeah.
And they were about to go nationally the
Yeah.
next day on actual billboards, and they pulled it. And they thanked us. They said the biggest ROI they got from the project was from that last minute question they added on at the end of each interview. So, Andreas.
Yeah, Arnie, you said that well, and I'll offer a shorter example and then just a suggestion here. we had a client that was really excited about a part of their visual identity that was leveraging. They're looking to develop a new logo as part of their visual identity, and they came up with a couple of concepts, and they were testing them in focus groups. And this was still back, when we were doing things live. Thankfully, we're doing them again, which is great. And what was really fascinating is everybody thought this one design was fantastic. We thought it was great. Our client thought it was great. The agency thought it was great. And then one person in the focus group just goes like this. They turn their head and they go, that looks like the hat of a Klansman. And everybody around the table went, oh, you're right. And everybody in the back room went, oh no. And it just, you couldn't have got to a moment of truth about an insight more directly than that. And it was just, suddenly it's like, yeah, we got to go back to the drawing board on that one. And it's just not going to fly. And I think if we're the holders of truth to gather insights, our key job often is to get our client to accept the truth. And this is where I have repeatedly stolen one of Arnie's famous words, and that is show, don't tell. So too often we want to do another PowerPoint graph and show another illustration of what something looks like, and we try to explain it with different words. And sometimes it's just better to show it. We had a client that developed a video to better illustrate what a segment and a persona was all about, that you could tell in terms of trying to socialize it internally. People are having a really hard time understanding it. And in developing the video, then it finally started to land. Now, can everyone afford to do that? No. Can you afford to do it all the time? No. But certainly audio clips and video clips from insights gathering helps a lot. And we know executives love that. Absolutely love that. And that's really a strong way in trying to get them to understand and accept something that might be a bit more negative or challenging to them.
There is one other way, if you will,
Yes.
to address the issue itself. Because you raise a good point. What do you do when things are not working out? And this comes straight from the UX discipline. We see more and more of this in the broader CX world. And that's the idea of iterative testing. So traditionally in UX, right, you do a few tests, you find out what's not working, and that's why you do the test. No one's upset by it. You go back to the drawing board, you have a conversation with the designers, and you say, all right, let's modify these things and take it to the next round of testing and see if that improves it. And then it does, and if anything, you start getting massive ROI for the simple reason that you're not just identifying issues, you're solving and then validating, if you will,
Yes.
the new recommended approach. Not always easy to do when you're dealing with something that's bigger than just an interface. But going back to your question about technology, today technology exists to simulate all kinds of service offering experiences. And again, with sort of 3D immersive technology, simulating 3D environments, the possibilities for iterating through research and through solutions to find that optimal place where the client needs to be. We live in the golden age for that. So I think the possibilities of turning bad news into good news are just endless today.
That's fantastic. So we can actually observe without disturbing, and which is a great thing that we can achieve. And I know in terms of which we've gone through and looked at a number of points, but so organizations sometimes will end up having to have a complete change in strategy. And I think that's a hard sell to the C-suite when you have to make that change, and in showing instead of telling, you're able to accomplish that. And we look to see, I guess you gave us examples of how you were able to communicate this to the C-suite to show them and have them to change your approach and strategy, because this is such an important part of business. And you have saved reputations that took years to build that could have been wiped out in with a few bad ads or presentation or in things. So it's just so important that firms know, and that marketing researchers know, that they're bringing value to each and every organizations that they serve and everyone that they interact with. So it's an important part of the things. And that even though the growth of data and all this data is there, without really the experience and common sense and the approach from marketing research studies, companies can run into a lot of trouble by not embracing what our firms have to offer. And I want to open it now. Just thank you, gentlemen, for this presentation. I want to open it now for any questions that we might have. Let's go, Stefan. You've got any questions that you want to share with us?
Thank you, Lee, and thank you, everyone. There's a question that I find very interesting. I'm smiling because it's going to be a tough one. But the question is, which comes first, UX or CX?
The chicken egg question.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you can go back to it philosophically, right? When you think of yourself, do you think of yourself as a person or as a user? I always go back to that. It's a fundamental and ontological question. You know, how do we consider ourselves? And that depends on context. It's not the straightest answer always. If I think if the context is a very immediate situational need, chances are I am thinking of myself as a user. But if it's broader, if I'm thinking of myself in the context of my life, my day, and so on and so forth, then I probably broaden it out a little bit. So I think there is merit in thinking of, which comes first for a particular project or a particular situation. Not in general, like which is higher in a hierarchy and so on. I think that's a fallacy, but there's nothing wrong in saying, if we have this particular project in this organization, we're dealing with brand architecture today, or we are dealing with, here's an M&A situation. That's a very common thing that all of our clients go through. What are we going to deal with here? Then the question we would ask is, well, what are you trying to solve for? Let's take the M&A example. This is very common. Technology company buys another technology company. Each one is a leader in the field. Each of the brands, the brand that is bought and the brand that has been bought, are both very well known in the market. Well, what do you now do with the interfaces? Do you bring them together and then affect behavior change? That has a lot of questions, not to mention legacy P&L silos and all sorts of other things. So, unfortunately, much as we hate the answer, it depends. In this case, it really does, whether it's situational or whether it's a broader holistic framework we're looking at.
Thank you, and I very much appreciate your going back to, what's the business issue? What are we trying to solve for? Andreas, your own perspective on this?
I have nothing to add. I wish I did. It's all about the why. Like what's the purpose? We get so hung up on the how and the what. We always have to come back to the why. The how and the what is easy, and there's lots of options we have there. But get to why. Why will tell us what we do first.
Absolutely. This transcends the UX versus CX question. It's the why drives any research, any quest for insights? Sorry,
Yeah. And
Arnie.
sorry to put up.
Yeah,
Not
sorry.
at all. No, not at all. I was simply going to agree with Andreas to a point where, I mentioned the dev shop, the workshop that we do. We always start that workshop, which happens at the end of at the end of insights gathering and so on. But we always start those with a strategic objectives exercise that asks the why. And our clients inevitably go, are you sure you want to ask that question? Like, why are we redesigning the website? But I mean, surely we are redesigning the website. And they're always surprised when we go through the exercise and you come up with a why. And you go, isn't that interesting? That now we have this in front of us, it actually does dictate how we go about prioritizing the ideas. So I think that's just so important.
Thank you. Another question, that's a tough one. How have you been able to help client organizations break down their internal silos to work together? On insights in general, by the way, not just UX and CX. That's the way the question was phrased, was on the insights. How do you get them to break down their silos and work together?
I'm happy to share a very quick bit, if you will, before handing it over to Andreas. Just a couple of things, for instance. One is actually just good old-fashioned discipline and what I like to call, common courtesy. So, for instance, if we as a research agency, as an agency, are approached by, say, a line of business in an organization where we know the people who run the insights division, for want of a better term, we always make sure that we connect the dots, both from a point of view of showing respect, but also to ensure that there isn't duplication of efforts. And we will go so far as to bring our own knowledge to the table and say, by the way, did you know that the insights team in your organization had actually done a study very similar to this 5 years ago? And let me connect you with X and Y. Sometimes it is a bit easier for us on the outside to observe the different moving parts, the silos, if you will, in our client organization, and bring them together and connect the dots. I just wanted to say that, but I know perhaps Andreas has something more substantive to add to this.
Well, just by way of example, it's a really good question. We had a client that said, great, we're really doing some fascinating things. We're making improvements for both users and our customers in our ecosystem, but we're playing in the margins, and it's just not good enough. Like, someone's going to come and eat our lunch unless we start to do something really big. So what did they do? They started to look at cross-silo journeys, and they made it very journey based. And they said, look what happens when we drag our customers across our silos. And then when they got to the point of understanding the insight and began to workshop what they would do with the insight, they quickly realized, wow, there's no way we're going to solve for this within a silo. We've got to bring different silos together and work together collaboratively, smarter together, as we like to say, to begin to tackle those problems. And suddenly, insights start to come from all kinds of different places and all kinds of different sources from different parts of the silo to bring to that kind of a problem and to challenge that. So I think it, in that environment, it took someone to say, we're just playing on the fringes here. This is helpful, but it's really not moving the needle on what we need to change and drive change. So even across those silos, because nobody in insights or in customer experience or in UX is going to change work structures. That's probably going to come from somewhere else. But if you are journey focused and those journeys cut across those silos, well, then you need to have agile teams at the very least that can be temporary in nature. They might be more permanent, that start to work across those silos in a more matrix structure that starts to tackle some of these problems for the benefit of the customer, for the benefit of the user.
That's exactly it, Andreas. And we're seeing more and more of that on our client side, where the working committees for the major projects will now involve individuals from not just different channels, lines of business, and of course insights teams. The other trend that we have noticed is a very welcome one. It seeks to break down the whole issue of P&L attribution, which is often a key barrier, frankly, to the convergence.
Thank you.
Okay.
No more questions from the attendees. Did you have anything that you guys wanted to? Actually, here's one.
Yeah.
How does the integration of UX and CX help the small, the SMB in, companies in the SMB sector or even startups, right? Because you've given examples in large organizations. What about the smaller ones?
I think it depends on how small you want to go, right? If you go into some of the smallest organizations today, it is all digital. I mean, every ad that you see on TV for accounting software, for any number of business tools that small businesses can use today, it is all digital. Even if what you're selling is something as fundamentally physical as a cookie, or coffee, or whatever it may be, you're ordering online, the social media presence, the advocacy. That's what makes your coffee so much more different from someone else's coffee experience. In fact, there's so much more to buying a cup of coffee than just a cup of coffee.
Actually, you bring up a very good point. Would you, and both of you, please expand on the impact of the pandemic on this issue that we're debating? My sense, but I'm not as expert as you are in either field, is that the pandemic, in fact, accelerated the need to transform, right? Everybody's been talking about digital transformation. Large organizations had, 3 to 5 year plans. All of a sudden, they had to solve for that in 3 to 5 weeks, or, months maximum. What have you seen in terms of the impact of COVID?
Stefan, it's Andreas here. I want to just come back to the previous question to say one thing for the smaller or mid-sized organization, and this has come from UX, where again I think that expression of beg, borrow, and steal. One of the things that UX was very good at doing was iterating and building iteratively on the next best design without trying to perfect it. So they really got down to the 80-20 rule. And what that also did, it started to evolve an insights gathering function that you could operate in a much smaller, less resource intensive way. So they introduced this idea that you don't need to have a whole bunch of people doing qualitative insights on something when we know we're not going to get much more from the 6th, 7th, 8th person that looks at this widget in this context. We're probably good with 5. Great, let's roll with it and do it and move on. So I think that's taught us across not just UX, but in market research, to understand that there's some things you can really do that are small, but very impactful, that don't always have to bring those big budgets, which could be a real barrier to doing market research, which is a problem for small and medium-sized businesses. And I think any outside agency should be able to get you to a price point that works for you and tries to leverage what works best for your organization, regardless of the size. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, please, Andreas.
Stefan, I'll offer a couple observations. One of the most immediate ones is this is my observation. A lot of our clients sort of put the brakes on some insights work they were doing. They wanted to continue to do the tracking studies because they were very keen, especially those that leverage quantitative online panels, for example, or did customer-based studies from lists. They still wanted to track what their customers were saying and feeling and doing in the context of experiences, and they wanted to see what COVID was doing in that context. So those were still very, very popular, and clients were still, we're going to continue to invest in those. But now suddenly they're going, oh, all this stuff we did face-to-face, we've got to do differently. And well, what can we leverage online that maybe we weren't doing before that we need to start considering now? And it also caused many of them to really start to look at the power of data analytics. Like, oh, we're sitting on all this data, we're not leveraging it enough. What can we use? What can we do there to get to the insights and the truths about our customers to drive those next best actions? Those are some of the things that I observed, and more now they're trying to triangulate all of these things that they're getting, which I think is a really, really positive development. Anytime there's stress on organizations, the good ones will stop, they'll pivot, they'll react, and they'll adjust accordingly, and they're better for it when they come out of it. And I think that's some of what we're seeing. Certainly with some of our clients, we're seeing it a lot.
That's exactly it. And to address this earlier point about the iterative approach, I think what we saw during COVID is this. Well before COVID, our client organizations had technologies, things like virtual advice, and of course, we know things like DocuSign have existed forever. The technology existed. What COVID did was, of course, as we all know, it enabled behavior change. It created a whole different acceptance threshold and acceptance framework amongst consumers, all of us. And I think kudos to our clients, frankly, for having just completely jumped on that, not necessarily waiting to perfect it, but they started to deliver on that 80-20 rule. And just in the last 2 years, I would say, we have done projects where our clients have significantly improved on something that they just started by way of, say, a service mechanism right during COVID. And like within the COVID period, we've seen them initiate, improve, evolve. And I think that's fantastic.
And Stefan, even the interpretation of insights post-COVID, like through this whole wave of COVID and now post-COVID, has evolved. And we've seen it in consumer tracking studies, both for our clients and even in other contexts, particularly here in Canada, where this very sort of socialist Canadian approach to sure, I'll play along, I'll do the right thing, I'll be good to my neighbor, I'll be good to my family, I'll do things that protect everybody, I'll get my shot, I'll wear my mask, and personally I was all in favor of that. But now we're seeing as fatigue is set in, and we all want to put it in the rearview mirror. We're seeing in the tracking work and even some of the analytic work that's now coming to bear, and how our clients are using this, we're seeing this tendency for people to now revert to me. Great, I did the social good thing. Now I'm coming back to me. What are you doing for me? How are you making my banking easier for me? How do I get more out of using this logistics provider in a way that suits me? And this me thing, I think, is going to be here for a while, just based on some of the data and evidence that we've seen.
That's extremely interesting. There's that social psychology, right? Arnie, are you seeing the same?
Not just that. So I'll take it one step further from what Andreas said. Not only is, of course, the observation bang on, but then when you look at the service delivery side of things and the experience design side of things, all of our best clients are focusing heavily on personalization. It is the validation of the me. And when you look at someone's consumer, when you look at the average consumer, sort of the experience ecosystem, as I like to call it, it's usually digital with Netflix and this, that, and the other, Amazon, whatever it is we do, but it's just the way in which we live our lives and experience our lives, the experience ecosystem. Personalization is everywhere. Amazon is looking at things that I buy and telling me what else would be good, and they're very good at it, which is why I keep going back to them, right? So Netflix is so on and so forth, and we are seeing that in other contexts in health, learning center, training, education is huge in the B2B world. That's happening more and more. We're going to see more of that in things like insurance, which are going to get hyper personalized as microinsurance, like just the whole industry is about to be upended. One could go on about this, but yes, focus on me. I am the center of my universe, and that's a truth we have to understand. Everything else, your channels, your organization, your offering, it all revolves around me. So how do you connect with me?
Thank you. And by the way, it's a great way to finish a session on something that's predictive, and that's maybe not controversial, but sort of probably surprising to a number of people. Lee, with this, I know you have probably you need a few minutes to wrap this up.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Yeah, I like the way it ended too with this predictive and seeing it the way we have all come out of the pandemic and the changes that we're seeing in society. It is so important, and market and research study is such an important tool in really gathering this information and presenting it to us so we can know how the population is changing and how the views are changing. Just want to extend my vote of thanks to our guest who attended the webinar, to Andreas and to Arnie and to Stefan and to staff at the MRIA, Wayne, who for helping us putting this together. And I really appreciate it. We have recorded this session and we will make it available. So we will send out a link. So we're looking forward to having many more sessions, and we will communicate with you the dates. So just want to again say thank you to our presenters and to our attendees, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.